Talent is a pursued interest. In other words, anything that you're willing to practice, you can do.
Most people know Bob Ross as a calm, gentle artist who painted dreamy landscapes in under an hour. With every brushstroke and the joy of painting, he cast a spell on viewers using his famous wet-on-wet technique. But behind the soft voice, fluffy hair, and happy little trees was a story far more complex than we ever imagined. His show aired weekly on PBS and turned him into a household name. With his laid-back humor and that unforgettable hair, Bob taught millions how to paint with ease. Even after he passed away from lymphoma, his fame only grew. Thanks to platforms like YouTube and Twitch, a whole new generation discovered him. But what fans didn't know was that Bob Ross had secrets and a life full of twists, heartache, and quiet strength. Bob Ross, born Robert Norman Ross, came into the world on October 29, 1942, in Daytona Beach, Florida. His parents, Jack and Ollie Ross, raised him in a simple Orlando home. His mother worked as a waitress and his dad was a carpenter. They gave Bob a modest but loving childhood. From the start, Bob showed he was different. He had a deep love for animals, and it wasn't just cats or dogs. He cared for injured squirrels, snakes, armadillos, even alligators. This kindness to animals would later become one of his most lovable traits on camera. Driven by a desire to help his family, Bob dropped out of school in the 9th grade to work with his father in carpentry. But tragedy struck when he lost part of his left index finger in a sawing accident. Still, this injury never stopped him from painting. In fact, he learned to work around it, proving nothing could hold him back. In 1961, everything changed. At just 18 years old, Bob joined the U.S. Air Force. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches, his towering presence caught attention, but his flat feet kept him from flying planes. Instead, he was assigned to a desk job as a medical records technician. Despite being behind a desk, Bob's physical presence helped him rise fast. He eventually became first sergeant, a position that required him to enforce strict rules. He earned the nickname Bus Emma Bobby for making soldiers scrub toilets and punishing them for showing up late. But this tough role didn't match his true personality. Deep down, Bob hated being mean. He once made a promise to himself. When he left the military, he'd never yell again. And true to his word, once he retired, he embraced the soft, gentle nature that fans around the world fell in love with. It was at Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska where Bob found inspiration. The breathtaking mountains and snow-covered landscapes sparked something inside him. Nature's beauty moved him, and he began painting as a way to capture what he saw. At first, it was just a hobby, but it soon became much more. While stationed in Alaska, Bob stumbled into a painting class hosted by the USO. That's when the fire was lit. But it wasn't until 1975 that his passion truly exploded, all thanks to a German painter named William Alexander. Bob caught an episode of Alexander show the magic of oil painting, and it blew his mind. The way Alexander made art look easy was both fascinating and frustrating. Bob later said, "The first time I saw Alexander on TV, it almost made me angry." Why? Because Alexander did in minutes what took Bob days. But instead of giving up, Bob became obsessed. He studied the wet-on-wet method, practiced nonstop, and slowly developed his own style. Painting became his escape, a peaceful space far from the rules and chaos of military life. Between 1975 and 1982, Bob juggled both painting and military service. His progress was slow, but steady. The wet-on-wet technique allowed him to finish paintings quickly, perfect for live demos and TV. But back then, it was just a dream. Bob started selling his Alaska-inspired art to tourists. Shockingly, he made more money from paintings than his military paycheck. He even painted in local bars using gold panning tins as makeshift canvases, a clever trick that boosted his speed and precision. After retiring in 1982, Bob set out to find William Alexander, the man who had unknowingly sparked his journey. He became Alexander's top student. But even with his growing skills, money was tight. He sold a few painting lessons, but not enough to live on. Struggling financially, Bob skipped haircuts and let his curls grow out. That big afro? It wasn't a style choice, it was a budget move. Ironically, it became his trademark look. Bob actually hated it, but fans loved it so much. He felt trapped by it. Even with a growing fan base, Bob never changed who he was. He wore his usual denim shirts and jeans. His voice, soft, comforting, and almost like a whisper. Watching him felt personal, like he was speaking directly to you. His laid-back, peaceful energy kept people coming back week after week. And the more they watched, the more they fell in love with the man behind the brush. But as calm as he seemed, Bob Ross's journey was built on pain, struggle, and resilience. And what happened next would show just how much he sacrificed to become a legend. Bob Ross didn't just teach painting. He taught peace. With every stroke of his brush and every soft-spoken word, Bob became more than a TV host. He became a symbol of calm in a noisy world. By the early 1980s, Bob had already walked away from a 20-year military career, but his journey was far from over. After touring as a traveling instructor for his old mentor, Bill Alexander, Bob was ready to carve his own path. And in 1983, he did exactly that. That year, he launched The Joy of Painting. At first, it was a small public television show produced by WNVC in Falls Church, Virginia. But what started quietly would soon explode into one of the most beloved art programs in history. By season 2, production moved to Muncie, Indiana, where Bob would film until the show ended in 1994. But even after it stopped airing, The Joy of Painting never truly ended. PBS began replaying Bob's best episodes as the best of The Joy of Painting. And suddenly, a whole new generation was falling in love with a man who made happy little trees and friendly clouds feel like therapy. But what made it work? Why did millions of people tune in to watch a man paint? Each episode was simple. Bob would start with a blank canvas, white or sometimes black, and coat it with what he called magic white, a wet base that allowed him to blend colors directly on the surface. No waiting, no drying, just pure creation. In just 30 minutes, Bob would turn that blank canvas into a masterpiece. Mountains, lakes, snowy forests, warm cabins. All done in real time, while he gently talked viewers through every step. And his tools? Nothing fancy. Just a few big brushes, a palette knife, and a whole lot of heart. He worked with colors like phthalo blue, cadmium yellow, alizarin crimson, and titanium white. With broad strokes and soft blends, he made it all look effortless. But Bob's real magic wasn't his technique. It was in his tone. As he painted, he'd talk to you, not like a teacher, more like a friend. A kind friend with a warm voice who reminded you that mistakes were okay because there are no mistakes, only happy accidents. And when he added a second tree to the canvas, he'd smile and say, "Everyone needs a friend." That was Bob. Soft, gentle, sincere. Sometimes he'd take a break from painting to introduce his pet squirrel, peapod, or share a clip from nature. He'd talk about animals he rescued or scenes he loved. It wasn't just art, it was life. Peaceful, quiet, beautiful life. Behind the scenes, Bob was even more dedicated than anyone realized. Each episode featured 3 versions of the same painting. One he made before filming to use as a guide. One he painted on camera. And one he painted afterward with extra detail for his instructional books. That's right, Bob Ross didn't just improvise. He prepared, and he practiced constantly. The final paintings were often donated to PBS stations or kept by Bob Ross Incorporated. Some even made their way to the Smithsonian. Occasionally, Bob would step aside and let others host a show. His son Steve, floral artist Annette Kowalski, and several guest painters would share their styles. But fans always came back for Bob, the calm in the storm. Every episode ended the same way, with Bob standing beside his finished painting, softly saying, "From all of us here, I'd like to wish you happy painting and God bless, my friend." That goodbye, it felt like a hug. But here's the twist. As Bob's fame grew, so did his burden. His curly afro, for example, that became his trademark. He actually hated it. He only got a perm once to save money on haircuts. But it stuck. And once it became part of the brand, he felt trapped by it. He never wore flashy clothes. Just denim, soft tones, and that ever-present smile. Behind the scenes, he wasn't rich, and he wasn't chasing fame. He just wanted to teach, to share, to give people something beautiful to hold on to. And in doing so, he built a legacy far bigger than he ever imagined. Bob Ross didn't just paint trees. He painted peace. At first, it was just a painting class. A grieving mother named Annette Kowalski had lost her son, and she was looking for anything that could bring her peace again. That's when she found Bob Ross. She sat in on one of his small art classes, hoping to take her mind off the pain. But what she found was something deeper. Bob's calm voice, his gentle way of teaching. It wasn't just about painting. It was healing. And right there, in that moment, a bond was born, one that would change Bob's life forever. Annette and her husband, Walt Kowalski, weren't just average people. Walt had worked in the CIA. He had money, connections, business sense. And after meeting Bob, the Kowalskis saw potential, not just in the man, but in the message. Together with Bob and his wife Jane, they launched Bob Ross Incorporated in 1984. The timing was perfect. The joy of painting had just started airing across the country, and with the Kowalskis' help, it exploded. Soon, over 80 million viewers were tuning in. Bob became a national treasure, but not everyone was cheering. William Alexander, Bob's old mentor, felt betrayed. He accused Bob of stealing his signature technique, the wet-on-wet method. Bob had learned it from him, yes, but now Bob was the face of it. The fame, the fans, the success, it all went to Ross. And for Alexander, that felt like a knife to the heart. But Bob didn't see it that way. The truth? Wet-on-wet painting wasn't even Alexander's to claim. The technique went back centuries to painters like Caravaggio. What made Bob different wasn't the method. It was the man, his soft tone, his kind heart, his ability to turn painting into therapy. And that's something Alexander could never match. But behind the canvas, things weren't so calm. Bob's show was free to watch. He never charged for those 403 episodes. He wasn't in it for money, but the Kowalskis were. They turned Bob's name into a business empire, selling brushes, paint instructional books, and art classes. By 1991, Bob Ross Incorporated was making $15 million a year. Still, Bob stayed grounded, quiet, kind, focused on painting. But then rumors started. Some whispered that Bob and Annette Kowalski were more than just business partners. The Kowalskis denied it. But years later, Bob's son Steve hinted that there might have been some truth after all. Then, tragedy struck again. In 1992, Bob's beloved wife Jane died of cancer. After her death, the company contract kicked in and everything changed. The original agreement said that if one partner died, their share would be split between the others. So when Jane passed, Bob lost control. He went from being the heart of the business to holding a minority vote in a company built on his face, his name, and his voice. He was trapped. As John D. Rockefeller once said, "A friendship founded on business is better than a business founded on friendship." For Bob, it was too late, and there was more pain behind the curtain. Bob had 2 sons from 3 marriages. His first son, Steve Ross, was born during his marriage to his first wife, Vivian Ridge. That marriage ended in 1977 after Bob's alleged infidelity. Shortly after, Bob married Jane. They stayed together until her passing in '92. They had no children together, but their bond was strong, one of the few constants in Bob's life. Just 2 months before his own death in 1995, Bob quietly married his third wife, Linda Brown. The marriage raised eyebrows, but Bob never spoke about it publicly. He kept his private life sealed shut, just like his emotions. But there was one person Bob let in. Steve, his son. Steve often joined Bob on the joy of painting, showing off his own impressive skills. Bob wanted him to carry on the legacy. He believed in him. But Steve didn't share that same passion. He painted well, but not with joy. The pressure of being Bob Ross's son was heavy. Their relationship became strained. They stopped talking. Even as Bob's health declined, the silence between father and son grew louder. And when Bob died in 1995, there were still things left unsaid. After years of silence between them, Bob Ross and son Steve finally reconnected, but the reason was heartbreaking. Bob had been diagnosed with lymphoma just weeks after losing his wife, Jane. The news hit hard. But even as his body weakened, Bob refused to stop painting. He still showed up, still smiled, still gave his audience joy, even when getting out of bed felt impossible. Behind the scenes, Bob kept his illness a secret. He filmed 3, sometimes 4 episodes a day, pouring everything he had into his art. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted to leave behind something beautiful. But as Bob fought for his life, those closest to him, the Kowalskis, were fighting for something else. His name, his legacy, his brand. Bob had co-founded Bob Ross Incorporated with them years earlier. But now, as his health declined, they saw an opportunity. With Bob gone, they would own it all. And Bob knew it. He had become the face of a $15 million empire. But he no longer had control. After his wife's death, her shares were split between the surviving partners. Bob was outnumbered, and the Kowalskis made sure he knew it. They began pushing hard for Bob to sign over the rights to his name and image. But Bob refused, over and over again. One final insult came when Annette Kowalski visited him during his illness. Not to comfort him, but to push a new contract. They wanted Bob's signature for a monument. But Steve, furious, kept the papers far from his father's eyes. Bob didn't need a monument. He needed peace. But the calls didn't stop. According to Steve, Bob would scream from his bed, "You're not getting my name." The Kowalskis just kept coming, call after call, until the very end. On July 4th, 1995, Bob Ross died at just 52 years old. The world lost an artist, a teacher, a friend. But to the Kowalskis, it wasn't a funeral. It was a board meeting. They didn't even show up. Bob's funeral was small, quiet, attended only by close family and friends. The news didn't reach the public for days. But the Kowalskis wasted no time. They moved to take full control of Bob Ross Incorporated. The name, the face, the brand, the money, everything. Bob's did not include the Kowalskis. Still, they tried to claim it all. Bob's estate executor, overwhelmed and outmatched, eventually signed a settlement. It released all sides from past claims. But decades later, Steve Ross uncovered a shocking detail. Bob had left him the rights to his name and image in a trust. Armed with this discovery, Steve sued. He wanted justice. He wanted his father's legacy back. But the court said no. The judge ruled that Bob had already given his publicity rights to the company while he was alive. So the trust couldn't give those rights to Steve after his death. The company won. Steve got nothing. Fans were outraged. Bob Ross had brought peace and beauty into millions of homes. But now, his name was being used for products, memes, and marketing, with no input from his own family. Steve Ross tried to move forward. He started teaching painting again, not for money, but to honor his father's spirit. Still, for many, the truth hurt. Behind every happy little tree was a heartbreaking story. If this story moved you, give this video a like and hit subscribe. And if you want to hear the shocking truth behind another beloved artist, check out the video on your screen now. Thanks for watching, and remember, you are loved.